Pause for a second. Remember that seemingly weird garden advice your grandparents gave you that made you immediately go, "You gotta be kidding me, right?" What if I told you they weren't just quaint superstitions told around the fire to pass the time, but were genuine beliefs that shaped, when they planted, what they grew and how they moved through their gardens after dark? Shocking, right? Wait till you see what's coming in at number 4. In this video, we're going to explore 20 creepy garden myths that our grandparents actually believed and discover why these strange superstitions took such deep roots in the soil of American garden culture. Roses soak up blood. Perhaps no garden myth is quite as disturbing as this one, that roses watered with blood would bloom in shades of deep, almost black red. Some farmers went further, claiming that any blood spilled on garden soil, whether from a cut finger or a butchered animal, would be absorbed by nearby roses, permanently darkening their petals. This belief was particularly prevalent in the South and in areas where large animals were slaughtered on the property. The connection between blood and red roses became so ingrained that some gardeners deliberately fertilized their rose bushes with blood meal, believing it would intensify the color and strengthen the plant's connection to the life force of the property. There's actually some truth here. Blood meal is an excellent source of nitrogen, and roses do respond well to it. But our grandparents believed the relationship was more mystical than chemical. Never plant on a full moon. Before you go gun blazing with your thoughts, no, this isn't some werewolf mythology. It was believed that the moon held tremendous power over garden decisions. Grandparents believed that planting on a full moon could cause crops to be cursed, resulting in plants growing in strange directions, producing bitter fruit, or attracting misfortune to the entire household. This belief was so widespread that entire communities would plan their planting schedules around lunar phases. The full moon was considered a time of dangerous energy, when the veil between worlds grew thin and supernatural forces could interfere with the natural order. Plants set in the ground during this phase were thought to absorb this chaotic energy, resulting in deformed vegetables, plants that grew sideways instead of up, or crops that mysteriously failed despite perfect conditions. Modern lunar gardening has found some basis for timing planting with moon phases, relating to moisture and gravitational pull. But our grandparents took it much further, seeing the full moon as genuinely malevolent to young plants. Plants feel pain. When you cut them back then, during harvest time, while children were about to cut a ripe cabbage, Grandma would lean in close and whisper, "Be quick about it, they know." Many of our grandparents genuinely believed that vegetables could feel pain and that a slow, hesitant cut caused unnecessary suffering. They'd notice how plants seemed to bleed sap when cut, how leaves would droop and wither after being severed from their roots, and how some vegetables released strong odors when damaged. To them, these were obvious signs of distress, perhaps even screaming we couldn't hear. Some farmers insisted they could sense a vibration in the air when cutting corn stalks. This wasn't entirely unfounded. We now know that plants do respond to damage by releasing chemical signals, essentially warning neighboring plants of danger. Those screams our grandparents sensed? They were detecting real phenomena, just interpreting them through the lens of their time. Next up is a complete shocker. If a bee dies in your garden, death visits. Soon bees occupied a special place in garden folklore, seen not just as pollinators, but as messengers between the physical and spiritual worlds. When a bee died in your garden, particularly if found on your doorstep or near your home, it was considered a death omen. Someone in the household or someone close to the family would soon follow the bee into the next world. The connection between bees and souls is ancient, appearing in folklore across many cultures.
Bees were thought to house the souls of the departed or to serve as guides for souls transitioning from life to death. Their appearance at windows was considered a soul trying to return home, and their death on your property was seen as that soul's final farewell. Some grandparents insisted that you had to tell the bees about any death in the family, going out to the hives or to wherever bees frequented in the garden and formally announcing the passing. Failure to do so would result in the bees leaving, taking their pollination and the garden's fortune with them. If this isn't creepy enough, wait till you see number 8. Talking to plants at night invites spirits. Everyone knows the myth that talking to plants can help them grow. But our grandparents had a strict rule: never ever speak to your garden after dark. To do so was to send an invitation into the spirit world, calling forth entities that might take up residence among your tomatoes and beans. The reasoning was simple yet chilling. During daylight, your words nourished the plants, encouraging their growth with positive energy. But at night, your voice carried beyond the physical world. Spirits wandering in darkness would hear your words and mistake them for a summons, coming into your garden and attaching themselves to your plants. Some believed these spirits were harmless, just lonely souls seeking connection. Others insisted they were malevolent, capable of blighting crops or following you back into the house. This belief was particularly strong in areas with large immigrant populations where European and Asian folklore about night spirits merged with American beliefs. Don't whistle in the garden. In many rural households, whistling in the garden was absolutely forbidden, particularly for children. This wasn't about being quiet to avoid disturbing wildlife. It was about preventing something far more sinister, calling forth snakes and evil spirits that lurked at the edges of cultivated land. The origins of this belief likely trace back to multiple sources. In some cultures, whistling was considered a form of communication with the spirit world. In the garden, where the boundary between wild and tamed was always thin, whistling was thought to attract entities from beyond. Snakes were a particular concern. Many grandparents insisted that certain whistled notes mimicked the sounds snakes use to communicate with each other, and that a child's careless whistling could draw every serpent within hearing distance directly to the garden. But it wasn't just snakes. Some believed that evil spirits, always listening for an invitation, would mistake whistling for a call and descend upon the whistler. Pumpkins could turn into witches. As autumn approached and pumpkins swelled in the field, an unsettling warning would pass through communities. Never leave a pumpkin unharvested past a certain date, and never let one remain uncut once brought to the house. The reason? Pumpkins left too long could become vessels for evil spirits, or, in some versions of the myth, could transform into witches themselves. This belief merged several streams of folklore. Pumpkins, being hollow, were seen as empty vessels perfect for housing wandering spirits. Come Halloween, an unpicked pumpkin sitting in the field might animate with a witch's consciousness, rolling on its own or glowing from within. The tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns actually ties into this belief. By cutting the pumpkin and hollowing it out, you were destroying any spirit's ability to use it as a home, and the face carved into it served as a warning to other spirits to stay away. Grandparents would never allow a whole pumpkin to sit on the porch past Halloween, insisting it be carved, cooked, or composted before November arrived. Worms crawl out on rainy nights to deliver messages from the dead. You know how, after a heavy rain, the ground would be covered in earthworms, writhing on pathways and drowning in puddles. To our grandparents, this wasn't just worms fleeing saturated soil. It was the dead sending messages to the living. Sounds crazy, right? But there was a general belief that earthworms, which spent their lives in the soil where bodies were buried, had special access to the spirit world. They lived in darkness, in the same substance that held human remains, and some believed that the souls of the departed could communicate through them. When rain drove the worms to the surface, it was because they carried urgent messages that couldn't wait. Grandparents would sometimes study the patterns of worms on pathways, reading them like strange, living letters. A large number of worms near the front door might signal that a deceased family member was trying to warn of danger. Worms that formed unusual patterns were read as signs of future events. But the underlying truth is that worms emerge because their tunnels flood and they need oxygen. Never thank someone for giving you a plant cutting. If you receive a cutting from a neighbor's prized rosemary or their iris, you might instinctively say, "Thank you." But in many gardening communities, that simple expression of gratitude was believed to curse the plant, ensuring it would never take root or thrive in your garden. This peculiar myth held that plants given as gifts carried a special magic, a blessing of generosity that transferred from one garden to another. But expressing thanks somehow broke that spell, severing the magical connection and leaving the plant bereft of the energy it needed to establish itself. Some of our grandparents believed that saying "thank you" implied a debt, and plants couldn't grow properly while an obligation hung over them. The proper response was either to say nothing at all, accepting the gift in meaningful silence, or to promise something in return. This maintained the exchange balance and preserved the magical balance necessary for both plants to thrive. Owls watching your garden bring bad harvests. Spot an owl perched near your garden, watching the beds with those unblinking eyes, and our grandparents would see only one thing: a harbinger of crop failure. Owls, being creatures of the night and hunters of the darkness, were believed to carry death energy that would seep into the soil wherever they roosted. Their silent flight, nocturnal habits, and eerie calls made them seem like visitors from another realm. When an owl took an interest in your garden, roosting on fence posts or in nearby trees, it was thought to be marking your land for misfortune. Some believed the owl's gaze itself could blight plants, that crops looked upon by those ancient knowing eyes would wither and fail. Others insisted that owls were scouts for darker forces, and their presence meant your garden had been noticed by entities that fed on life force and growth. Ironically, owls are actually beneficial as they control rodent populations that would otherwise devastate crops. But fear of their symbolic meaning overrode practical considerations. Speaking of evil and fear, you may want to stick around for what we've got at number 13. Before then, here's one for the ivy lovers. Planting ivy near your door invites ghosts. Inside ivy, with its climbing tendrils and ability to cling to almost any surface, was both valued and feared. Planted against the home's exterior, particularly near doors and windows, it was believed by our grandparents to create a ladder for spirits, providing them easy access from the outside world into the domestic space. The reasoning was symbolic, but taken literally. Ivy climbs by, finding purchase and pulling itself upward, exactly as spirits were thought to do when trying to enter the homes of the living. Each tendril was seen as a potential handhold for ghostly visitors, and ivy growing thick around a doorway created a veritable highway between worlds. Some believed that spirits of the recently deceased, still oriented to their former homes, would use ivy to return, trying to resume their lives as if nothing had changed. Others feared that any wandering spirit might take advantage of ivy's invitation, bringing unknown entities into the household. Carrots pulled too late would scream. Back then, children working in the garden were often told, "Pull those carrots before the first hard frost, or you'll hear them cry." And no, it wasn't metaphorical. Many grandparents genuinely believed that carrots left in the ground too long developed a kind of consciousness, and that pulling them after a certain point would produce an audible scream. The myth originated from several sources. Carrots do sometimes split or crack when pulled from cold, hard ground, producing sounds as roots break and soil compresses. To imaginative ears, particularly children's, these sounds could easily be interpreted as cries. Additionally, the timing was tied to practical concerns. Carrots left too long could become woody and inedible, so scaring children with tales of screaming vegetables ensured timely harvest. But many adults believed it too. Some claim to have heard faint, high-pitched sounds when pulling late-season root vegetables, particularly in the quiet of early morning or dusk. If you plant garlic on the wrong day, it loses its power against evil. Garlic held a special place in the garden and was valued not just for flavor, but for its protective properties against evil spirits, illness, and malevolent magic. But when planted on the wrong day, it would grow as nothing more than a common vegetable, stripped of all supernatural strength. This myth varied by region and family tradition, though. While some insisted garlic must be planted during a waning moon to harness the darkness-fighting properties of increasing light that would follow, others specified certain saints' days or particular dates tied to ancient calendars. The wrong day might be during a full moon, on a Sunday, or when the planets aligned in inauspicious ways. Whichever it was, our grandparents took it seriously, believing that garlic planted correctly could protect the entire property. The belief was that garlic's protective power came not just from its pungent odor and natural antibacterial properties, but from a deeper magic that had to be activated through proper ritual and timing. A black cat crossing the garden kills the crop. Not to worry, your black cat is simply harmless. But this wasn't so with our grandparents. The sight of a black cat padding through the vegetable rows would send them into a panic. They believed it would curse the crops, causing them to wither, fail, or produce bitter, inedible harvests. Black cats were thought to be witches' companions, or even witches in disguise, and their presence in the garden meant malevolent magic was at work. Some believed the cat was marking crops for later theft by supernatural means, stealing the life force or the flavor while leaving the physical plant intact. Others thought the cat's shadow falling on young plants would stunt their growth permanently. Creepy, yeah. The superstition was strong enough that some families would keep dogs specifically to chase away cats, or would plant strong-smelling herbs like rue to deter the cats. Interestingly, this created a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. Gardens in areas with many black cats might indeed fare worse, not from curses, but from the cats digging or disturbing delicate seedlings. Never point at a gourds, with their strange shapes and hard shells, occupied an odd place in garden folklore. And one rule was absolute: never point directly at a growing gourd. To do so was to invite bad luck, curse the harvest, or even bring misfortune to your entire household. In many cultures, gourds were used to hold everything from water to spirits, medicines to sacred objects. Pointing at one was thought to mark it with your energy in an aggressive way, essentially claiming it or challenging it before its time. Some believed that pointing focused too much attention on the gourd, attracting the jealous notice of spirits, or causing the plant to become self-conscious and stop growing. Others held that the gesture somehow transferred bad luck from the pointer to the gourd, which would then infect the entire crop. Children were scolded harshly for pointing at gourds, and even adults would gesture in indirect ways, nodding toward them or describing their location rather than indicating them directly. Garden scarecrows could come to life at night. You've probably heard the stories. After dark, scarecrows could step down from their posts and walk through the fields. Our grandparents often told the tales with varying details, but shared common elements. Some said scarecrows patrolled the garden's boundaries, ensuring no one stole from the fields. Others claimed scarecrows were gathering places for wandering spirits, that entities without bodies could temporarily inhabit the straw-stuffed forms and experience the physical world again. The most frightening versions insisted that scarecrows were watching the house, keeping track of the family's comings and goings, reporting back to something older and stranger that lived in the woods beyond the fields. These stories served a practical purpose, keeping children out of the fields at night where they might damage crops, injure themselves, or encounter actual dangers like wells, equipment, or wild animals. But many grandparents told these tales with such conviction and detail that they clearly believed them on some level. Enjoying these myths so far? Keep watching, because number 20 is definitely one of the most shocking yet. If you hear corn rustle at midnight, it's not the wind. Standing in a cornfield at midnight is an eerie experience. The slightest breeze creates whispers and rustles that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But our grandparents insisted if you hear corn moving at midnight in the absence of wind, you're not alone. Something is walking between the rows. The midnight hour was considered a time when the veil thinned, when spirits could move more freely through the physical world. Corn, being tall and dense, provided cover for these entities, allowing them to walk unseen among the stalks. Farmers would sometimes report seeing lights moving through their corn at night or hearing footsteps that stopped when they called out. And so, Grandma warned children never to run into cornfields after dark, not just because of the danger of getting lost, but because of what might be waiting there in the shadows. Something about corn, its rapid growth, its golden color, its association with sustenance and survival, made it feel like a place where the ordinary and supernatural could meet. Rain on freshly planted seeds means the dead are watering them. Plant seeds in the morning, and if rain comes that afternoon, grandparents would nod knowingly. The dead are watering your seeds, they'd say, not as poetry, but as fact. This belief held that ancestors watched over the living, and that rain falling on newly planted seeds was a blessing from beyond. The timing was key to this belief. Random rain was just weather, but rain falling within hours of planting was too coincidental, too perfect to be natural. It was interpreted as intervention from the spirit world, proof that loved ones who had passed on still cared for the family garden and the family's well-being. Some grandparents would time their planting to coincide with memorial days or anniversaries of deaths, hoping to encourage this supernatural assistance. They'd speak to the deceased while planting, asking for help, describing what they were growing and why. The rain that followed, if it came, was viewed as an answer, a promise that the ancestors were listening and would provide. What could be more creepy? Keep watching to find out. Flowers blooming out of season were an omen of death. A rose blooming in January, daffodils pushing through November snow. These unseasonal flowers might seem like gifts, beautiful anomalies brought on by warm spells or protected microclimates. To our grandparents, they were death omens, warnings that someone nearby would soon pass away. The reasoning was straightforward. Nature has an order, a proper time for everything. When that order was violated, when flowers bloomed outside their season, it indicated that the natural world was disturbed. These out-of-season blooms were thought to be pulling energy from the wrong side of the year, from the death time when they should be dormant, and that this energy had to come from somewhere. That somewhere was the life force of someone nearby. The more beautiful and healthy the out-of-season flower, the more imminent the death. Some families would cut these blooms immediately, hoping to stop whatever process had been set in motion, while others refused to touch them, fearing that interference would direct the death curse toward the one who disturbed the flower. Never burn weeds at night. The end of a long day of gardening, and you've pulled a mountain of weeds. The logical time to burn them is evening, when the day's work is done, and you can tend the fire as the sun sets. But grandparents would be horrified at this suggestion. Burning weeds after dark was strictly forbidden, believed to send up smoke that would summon wandering souls to your property. Smoke, rising between earth and sky, was seen as a medium of communication with the spirit world. Burning plant matter released the plant's essence in a form that spirits could perceive and be drawn to. But timing mattered critically. Burning in daylight was safe because spirits were less active, less able to perceive and respond to signals from the physical world. But burning at night, when spirits walked more freely, was essentially lighting a beacon that would attract every wandering soul within range. The specific danger of burning weeds, as opposed to clean wood, was that weeds were seen as plants of chaos and disorder. They thrived where they shouldn't, spread against human will, and represented the wild, reclaiming the tamed. Burning them released chaotic energy that resonated with displaced, troubled spirits, those who had died badly or who wandered without rest. Step out into your garden tonight, and you might find yourself wondering, were our grandparents simply superstitious, or did they understand something we've forgotten? Whether you believe in these myths or not, they remind us that gardens have always been places of mystery, growth, and transformation. Which of these beliefs surprised you most? Do you have garden superstitions passed down in your family? Share your stories in the comments below, and until next time, happy gardening, whether by sunlight or moonlight.